Welcome, everyone, to Conscious Caring Resources, which is another platform to help you care for others and yourself, provided by Alzheimer Speaks. I'm Lori LeBay, and I am the host and founder of Alzheimer Speaks, along with Conscious Caring Resources. Here, we like to provide you all kinds of different resources that will enrich your life, just like on our other platforms that we host, our radio show, our blog, our Dementia Chats webinars, where the experts actually have dementia, our resources, and I also do some Keynotes Training and Consulting. But we believe it's just critical to give voice and enrich lives to people all around the world when it comes to our dementia care. And I am so thrilled and so honored to have with us today Eilon Caspi, who is a gerontologist and behavior specialist. He's also the founder and director of the Dementia Behavior Consulting here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He specializes in evidence-based psychosocial strategies for prevention of various forms of distressing behavioral expressions. And Eilon believes in promoting the positive emotional states and unlocking the potential for optimal psychological well-being for those living with dementia. He also is my co-facilitator on Dementia Chats as well. So welcome, Eilon. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm thrilled to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of my wood carving work and its connection to people living with dementia. I'm also very appreciative of the last over 3 years that I volunteer for your really cutting edge, one of your cutting edge platforms, the Dementia Chats webinars, really connecting with the lived experience of people with dementia and hearing their voice and what they think about the disease, their struggles, their hopes, and what they believe can help individuals to live better with the disease despite substantial cognitive disabilities.
Well, great. Well, today I'm really excited to help you be able to share what you've done. People are probably thinking wood carving, dementia, what's the connection here? So why don't we start out with just a little background on what made you even get into wood carving, and then how did you apply that to dementia?
Right. So when I was in elementary school many years ago, I enjoyed a woodworking class. And since then, I didn't have any, I didn't work with wood. I didn't touch wood for many, many years. But I had some affinity to it. And I wasn't sure if it's just nostalgia or is it something that I really want to do. But I did have a dream, which was to, when I will be 80 years old, I wanted to carve wood just for fun at my backyard on a piece of a trunk of wood. And my wife, who knew about this dream, surprised me for my 40th birthday. And she found this incredible teacher, Konstantinos Papadakis, who is an old world wood carving master from the island of Crete. He started wood carving when he was 9 years young in Greece, and today he's 80 years old, and he's a very accomplished wood carver here in Minneapolis, and is our artistic wood carving studio. So that was my gift for my 40th birthday, and I'm doing it for 4 years now. Every Tuesday evening I go for a couple of hours, and it's like a virus. I can't give it away. I love doing it, and I'm just completing a project and then starting another one, because there's something about working with wood. I know every person has affinity to different type of material, and it's great, whether it's glass or marble or a different material. But for some reason, I have this affinity to wood. And there's something about connecting with the wood, immersing yourself in the wood. I often feel as if it's meditative, and it's very calming, and it's very soothing. There is a concept in psychology, a well-known concept. It's called the flow experience. When you immerse yourself in an activity you really enjoy, and you forget yourself in it, and you forget all your other parts in your life, and it has a healing effect. So that's what. So I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to learn with this, to continue and learn with this teacher.
Wonderful. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the flow too, because one of the things that we like to bring out here is, accenting what is people's passions. And that comes in all different shapes, sizes, and creative abilities. And so yours is wood carving, somebody else's might be dance or song or movie or different forms of art. It doesn't make any difference. We all find that flow in different ways, and many of us find it in multiple ways. And it's important to kind of, I don't know, to me, it's one of those centering things that we all need to calm down in this fast-paced world. And so as much as we don't like the concept of taking care of ourselves, it's a great way to take care of yourself and just take that kind of quiet time. So I'm excited to, like I said, talk about this today and share, what you've done. Why don't you take our audience through the process of how you even create the piece? I mean, how the heck do you pick the wood and know what tools to use and all of those types of things?
Okay, I just want to mention that my hope is that by sharing the piece, it will encourage people to, whether it's people in general or people who are touched by dementia, whether it's people with dementia or their family or professional care partners, and to encourage them to pursue their aspirations in the intersection between neuroscience and the arts. We know from research studies that engagement in art-related work can be very healing to individuals with dementia, and also can be very healing for those who care for them. So you asked a little bit about the brain itself. The brain that I'm holding right now is the first brain that I carved, and I'm going to try to bring it a little bit closer to the camera.
That's great.
And this brain actually, this piece of wood, we believe, so my teacher is telling me, because I couldn't identify the type of wood. He thinks that this is made of elm. And in fact, it's an interesting story. I was driving to visit Lakeview Ranch, Minnesota, to see Judy Berry at her phenomenal care homes when she used to be the CEO there here in Minnesota. And I saw a piece of wood falling off a truck. Now, for a while, I was looking for a brain, and I look online, and there are plastic models with all the parts that you can buy, but they're very expensive, several, a few $100s. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pick up this piece of wood and start working with it. So it didn't cost me a dime, but I also made all the mistakes that one can do. The first mistake is that you're supposed to choose the wood, the type of wood, based on what you want to do. And I didn't do that. The second thing you want to do in most carvings that you work, wood carving work that you do, is to make sure that the wood is dry enough. I didn't do that either. I was completely inexperienced. I just started carving for practice purposes, and that was the result. It was fairly good, but the piece of wood was too firm. It was simply too strong. So when I finished it, I approached my teacher and I asked him, can you tell me what would be a soft piece of wood that I can work with? He said, oh, sure, basswood. Basswood is one of the most common types of wood used for certain items in wood carving. And so I bought a piece of basswood and I worked with it, and it was fine, but it was too soft. So the hand tools would dig in too much, and you really have to control the tool. But the result was fairly good, and I gave it to a family friend who's a neuroscience scientist with children, does a lot of MRIs. Dr. Eilon Gordon, who was a postdoc at Yale University, and now she's a professor in Israel. So I gave it to her as a surprise gift because she was very interested in my first piece. And then I came to my teacher and I said, Konstantinos, please, can you tell me what would be the best type of wood for this purpose? And he said, mahogany. So at the studio, which is an experience in and of itself to visit, at the alley there in the studio. He has wood from decades ago, and he picked up this Honduran mahogany. And in fact, I have the second half of the piece that this is basically the piece that I used of the mahogany. You can see it here. And I don't think it's very hard to find a Honduran mahogany these days. But the reason why I chose it is because the color of the wood is beautiful. The pattern of the grain is beautiful. And again, the level of firmness is optimal, for me at least, in terms of the resistance that the wood gives you when you carve the wood. So that worked really well. So I had to get to my third grain to get it right. So yeah, this is the wood, and the weight of that piece that we're going to see later is slightly less than an average human brain. We're gonna send a link at the end. We're gonna share a link with the description, all detail. You don't have to write it down right now. And it's modeled after a brain hemisphere of a person who was an educator, an anatomist, who donated his brain, and it was on display in a temporary exhibition at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And people ask me, so how long did it take you to carve the brain? And the first time I didn't log the time, but this time and my second time and the third time I did. And interestingly enough, both the second time and the third time took me basically the exact time period. 62 hours. 62 hours over a full year, because we had our baby girl, Natalie, in the middle of the year, and that slowed me down.
I suppose so.
Yeah, I used to do much more at home, to carve more at home, and with a baby, it changed things, let's just say. So the other thing is that, I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm only using hand tools. I decided early on that I want to do it the old-fashioned way, and I don't want to use power tools. I think that when you use power tools, you lose something in the process. In terms of the connection with the wood and understanding of the wood, the relationship with the wood. I think it's very important. Again, I may regret it later on if because that's not the way I'm doing it now is not the most efficient way. You could carve wood, and it takes much longer to do it just with hand tools. But so far, I'm sticking to it, and I really enjoy it. So these are kind of general background about the piece, which we will see a little later.
Okay. Well, I think that choice to use hand tools versus power tools kind of gets back to that flow, and that energy, and finding that kind of that Zen place when you're working, versus, and all of that. It would be a very different experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I want to just add that when you look, and I did hundreds of observations of people with dementia in care homes, long-term care homes, dedicated to this population. And when you see people with dementia who struggle in large groups, noisy and hectic large groups in nursing homes and assisted living residences, but if you bring them to this very small 2 to 3 or 5 people, small quiet room, maybe with the music, that soothing music in the background, and a very skilled leader of the group in art therapy, whether it's drawing with watercolors or any other type of artwork, you really see this flow experience when it's really led well and planned thoughtfully, and there's the cueing and the supervision and cueing and encouragement and praising. You can really see that people thrive when they really don't do well in those large groups that they're literally disconnect and they lose themselves and they're literally leaving the group.
Yeah, good point. When you decided wood carving, I'm sure you didn't start out going, I'm gonna carve a brain. I'm sure that wasn't when you were, a little lad and saying you were going to be, 80 in your backyard carving. What led you to decide to, do a brain for your first piece?
Right. So before that, I did some name signs, and I usually do relief signs when the letters elevate themselves above the surface, when you carve around the letters. So it creates the effects that the letters come up. So I did several name signs for family members. I carved 3 baseball bats.
Mm-hmm.
Again, only with hand tools. So I walk into the store and I buy the ash type of wood.
Uh-huh.
And the person at the store goes to the lathe to actually carve it.
Uh-huh.
And I said, no, I want to do it myself. And he looks at me, why would you want to do it yourself? It will take you forever. I said, that's exactly what I want. So so I did 3 baseball bats, and I really enjoyed the process. I gave one to nephew from my wife's side, and the other one to a nephew from my side of the family. And I kept one for us because it's just nice to look at it at home, and maybe I'll play with my daughter one day with it, and maybe I'll carve her name on it one day. So I do that. I also I want to share, and I'll get to the question, I promise, in a second. But I also carved more recently this piece. I don't know if you can see well.
Yep, you can see it real good.
And we can share a picture later, but it says, "See me, not my dementia." And essentially, it's the educational message that we want to focus on the person first, and only then on their cognitive disabilities, and how we can assess, identify, and compensate for them in a thoughtful and gentle, proactive, anticipatory way. So this is a piece that I'm using when I give talks and trainings for family and professional care partners. Mm-hmm. See me, not my dementia. In fact, there's a book by the late Professor Tom Kitwood that is called the name of the book, see if I'm not blanking on it, Dementia Reconsidered, the mm-hmm. person comes first.
Okay.
And throughout the book, one of the themes is that by us, gerontologists, practitioners, and researchers for decades, we focus too much on the pathology. And only in the last 10 years or 15 years, we're starting to focus, number one, to listen to the person with dementia, mm-hmm. which is exactly what your mission is, and you're doing it so phenomenally well with your different platforms, but also to really focus on the person, who they are as human beings, focus on preserving their identity, personhood, and dignity, and then, yes, understanding their cognitive disabilities, but more importantly, focusing on their remaining abilities, those remaining assets, and it's called a strength-based approach. And that makes all the difference when we interact with these individuals. But for family members, it can be very difficult because they're losing their loved ones every day, and they need to go through the process of accepting the losses and mourning over each loss along the journey with the many transitions along the way. Mm-hmm. So these were some of the pieces I did before, but you asked me about what led me to carve the brain. So when I work with family members and direct care staff, home health aides, and professionals, in working with these individuals and optimizing their well-being and preventing behaviors, what inspired me initially was one part of the brain. And that's one of the most ancient parts of the brain, and it's called the amygdala. And the amygdala attaches attaches emotion to memory, and it regulates emotions. And we know that this part of the brain remains fairly intact, not with everyone, until later stages of the disease, much later than other functions that the person is losing earlier on. So the ability of the person, first of all, people with Alzheimer's disease in particular, share and experience the same range of emotions that all of us feel, mm-hmm. right? And they may have difficulty expressing those emotions verbally, but they're certainly expressing it non-verbally later on in the disease. So the ability to experience emotions remains much later than the ability to remember, speak, and understand. And this is the central channel, if you will, through which we need to communicate with these individuals if we really want to bring calming effects on them, if we want to diffuse behaviors, if we want to understand their inner world. And as Naomi Feil and Vicki de Klerk-Rubin, who Naomi founded the validation method, we want to focus and validate their emotional experience, their subjective experience, and tune into their world, into their inner reality, instead of insisting on bringing them into our reality when they are not capable of doing it at a certain point of the disease. So reality orientation can work with some individuals in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, but then when you get to the mid stage, and I hate to make generalizations, but then reality orientation in general can cause frustration to the person and to the care partners. So that's why I did it. And in the first brain that I did, I marked the amygdala here, even though realistically it is located deep inside the brain. It's just a representation for illustrative purposes, so you can see it here. And I think there's something about showing something visual with family or professional care partners that they can relate to, that they can remember, that it will stick somewhere, and they will remember that there's those different parts of the brain that are in charge of different functions. It can help family members understand the stages of Alzheimer's disease. It can help them understand what are the cognitive disabilities and at which stage in general they are being damaged, and what are the remaining abilities as well. So it has tremendous value in terms of an educational tool when we work with care partners of these individuals.
Why don't we have you show us the process of putting this piece together?
Okay, so when I donated the woodcarved piece to the Cushing Center, it's a brain center at Yale University. It's at the basement of the medical library. There's a beautiful exhibition there. I also gave them a booklet with over 60 images that depict and illustrate the process of carving the piece. I thought that the visitors to the center could enjoy it. And I recently learned that there's about 2,000 school kids, beyond other visitors, such as medical students and neurosurgery residents, that visit the center every year. So I thought that they will enjoy, especially the kids would enjoy seeing some of the images that illustrate the process of carving the brain. And while I'm mentioning the Cushing Center, I just want to thank the curator of the center who helped me with the process and the display and the presentation of the piece. Her name is Terry DeGrady, and she was extremely helpful with the entire process. So I just wanted to mention that. And as you can see here, on there's two images here. On the right-hand side, you can see my baby girl, Natalie, with a Yale shirt that her grandparents bought her, and holding the piece shortly after I finished it. I called the piece Mind Over Matter. On the left-hand side, this is actually the back cover of the booklet. On the day where I donated the piece to the Cushing Center, at the Cushing Center. And you can see above me on the left-hand side, there's hundreds of brains, real brains, that are in the original jars that Dr. Cushing, the pioneer neurosurgeon, was treating these individuals and conducting surgery on from different parts of the world. But when the school kids come to the center, they cannot touch those brains. So now they can at least have something tangible to hold, and hopefully it will prompt their curiosity about the different parts of the brain, about people with dementia in general, and about their aspirations between neuroscience and the arts. So I'm going to skip a couple of slides where there's a text description of the brain, and you can see it later. I'm going to just wait a few seconds so that it will record it. Some of the things that I mentioned a little earlier, kind of general information about the piece. And then you have a description of what led me to carve the piece, which I shared a little earlier, and then a credit to my teacher, Konstantinos Papadakis. And in fact, he recently asked, my teacher, Konstantinos, asked the following question when he reflected on his early years in Greece, and his feelings when he first learned about woodcarving. And what he said was, "Have you ever fallen in love?" Kind of echoing his lifelong love to his work working with wood and carving wood. All right, so what we can see on the right-hand side is my second brain hemisphere, which I've mentioned earlier, made out of, carved out of basswood, which I gave to a family friend, Dr. Ilanit Gordon. And it's sitting right on top of the raw piece of mahogany, which I used to carve the third brain, which is the focus of this presentation. So again, on the left-hand side, we can see the raw piece sawed to the size, the kind of slightly bigger than the size of the end product. And next to it, you can see the mallet that I use, part of the process. And you can see some of the tools that I use, the hand tools, gouges that I use, and we can see some of them later as well. This is a top view of the piece, and we can see here the first strokes working with the wood, and I'm using one of the gouges here. And on the right-hand side, we can see at the top, we can see my two first brain hemispheres. One on the upper left is made out of elm, which you saw earlier, and one on the right made out of basswood. And then here in the bottom of that slide, we can see, of the image, we can see the raw piece of wood of mahogany. So here I'm starting to pencil and mark the general shape of the brain at the front of the piece. Here is a top view on the right-hand side with compared to my the basswood piece, showing that I have a long way to go still to carve down the piece to the width and length of the target size and shape. So here I continue this process on the left, and I'm starting on the right-hand side. I'm starting to get closer to the pencil tracings of the general shape of the brain. Here we can see my teacher, Konstantinos Papadakis, demonstrating to me how to round the piece with a gouge and a mallet, a gouge in his left hand and a mallet in his right hand. So on the right-hand side, we're getting closer to the size and shape and length. Here we can see that I'm starting to carve the bottom of the piece around the brain stem. And then, of course, my teacher is showing me that I still have a long way to go in carving the piece and getting to the size that we want it to be based on the real brain that it was modeled after. Here are some comparisons to my first brain, again, as a target size and shape. On the right-hand side, we can see the bottom of the brain hemisphere around the brain stem. And the right image, we can see that I'm starting, the brainstem is starting to be elevated as I carve around it, and it elevates itself from the surface. Here we can see, continue to work, and we're starting to see the cerebellum. On the left side of the screen, we can see the cerebellum starting to elevate itself. And on the right-hand side, my teacher demonstrates how to carve right next to the brainstem. All right, and we're starting to see on the left-hand side the general shape of the cerebellum. And we're going to talk about it a little later. On the right-hand side, my teacher is choosing the right type of gouge for the particular purpose of the next step, which is carving the cerebellum, as you see him starting to show me how to do it on the right-hand side. All right, on the left-hand side, we can see 3 images of the real brain of an individual who was an educator and an anatomist who donated his brain to, I believe, University of Minnesota which was then borrowed temporarily for an exhibition at the Science Museum of Minnesota, where I saw the brain, took pictures of it, and it really helped me with the patterns that I was trying to carve of the brain, trying to approximate as much as possible a real brain. So what I did, I took those pictures, I printed them, and then I used the patterns to imprint them using a carbon paper, which I will show a little later, on the brain on the piece of wood. Now, on the right-hand side, we can see that I made a mistake while in the process of carving the piece. And the mistake was that the temporal lobe, if you see on the right-hand side, the top image, was not as prominent. It wasn't extending out as it should. And I thought, oh no, this is not going to go well. But my teacher has so much experience, and he was just approaching me and saying, no problem at all. We're just going to add another piece of mahogany, which we see at the middle slide, and we're just going to carve it down to the height, to the level that we want it, which is exactly what we did. And in a way, it makes for an interesting story, because the Cushing Center, where I donated the brain to, is named after Dr. Cushing, a pioneering neurosurgeon who conducted surgery on brains. So in a way, it kind of, it's a nice story perhaps to share with the kids who visit the center now on a regular basis at the Cushing Center at Yale University. So here we see that I start to carve down the added piece that we glued to the original piece. And on the right-hand side, I completed carving it down, and we can actually see the demarcation between the original piece and the piece that was added. And in the bottom slides, on the left, we see I'm starting to carve those patterns using a small V-shaped tool. And on the right-hand side, I'm using a larger V-shaped tool to make those foldings of the brain, the external side of the brain, more deeper. And here we can see on the left-hand side, as I mentioned earlier, I took a very thin piece of paper, and I used the pictures that I took from the real brain, and which I printed down. I printed them, and I marked the foldings on the inside part of the brain on the piece of paper. And then you can't see it here, but there's a carbon paper right behind the piece of paper. And I used it I went over those patterns again firmly with a pencil, and it transferred itself into the wood, as you can see in the image. And then on the right-hand side, I'm starting to carve those patterns from left to right, deeper into those foldings. Here we can see the same process, only with the cerebellum. On the left-hand side, we can see how I imprinted those tracings on pencil. And now I started to carve it. And that was actually the hardest part to carve, because it's fairly small area and there's not so good access to all those parts. And also there's a risk that you're going to pop out certain parts. You can always glue them back if you keep them. But that was the hardest part because of the size and the lack of access to those small areas. So the piece is almost complete. Now I applied some finishing on top of the piece. And so far until now, these were my own amateur pictures that I took during classes. And on the right-hand side, the rest of the pictures are professional pictures by a friend of mine who's a professional photographer in St. Paul, Minnesota, Jason R. Campbell. There's a link to his website, very, very talented photographer, which we can see the completed piece on the right-hand side. And these are other views of the same piece. The left-hand side is the internal part of the brain, and the right-hand side we can see images of the external side of the brain. And here is when I gave the brain to the Cushing Center. I'm here sitting with Dr. Dennis Spencer, who was the former head of neurosurgery I believe, at Yale University. We're sitting in a coffee place in New Haven, Connecticut, and shared it with him before giving it to the center. On the right-hand side, you can see the link to my website and my email if anyone has questions about the process or anything related to this piece of my wood carving work in general. So yeah, so that was this is the piece, and you know, there's the last picture, which I hope you can see, the back cover, but for some reason it doesn't show up, but we can share it later. I think we saw it at the first slide. So just gonna exit here. Anyway, so this is the process of carving the brain. Yeah, so that's, I hope it gives kind of a good overview of the process.
Sure. And if people want to purchase the book, is that available to do then through Shutterfly, or do they need to go through you, or how does that work?
Yeah, so yeah, we need to give credit to Shutterfly, which is the software and the program and platform with which I created this booklet. And we're going to share their link later on. But certainly, you can purchase it by. I can provide a certain link where you can do it, and you can see here the button order where you can order it. It's not cheap. I have to share that with you. But if you wait for, occasionally they have sales, significant sales, you might be able to purchase it in a significantly lower price, as I did. So yeah, you can do that. I have nothing to do with this process in terms of, I'm not going to get anything out of that in terms of compensation, and I'm completely fine with that. I just love sharing the work.
Can you tell us, Eilon, how do you see the potential of this brain being used in a practical sense with children and family and professionals?
Sure. So I mentioned a little bit about it a little earlier, but there's a few things that I think that could be useful. I want to start with a quotation of a family member, Dr. Sumner Richman, here in Minnesota, who cares for his wife for over a decade, and she has Alzheimer's disease. And he shared with me recently when I gave him a framed image of the brain, just as a gesture of friendship and appreciation of his work in the advocacy and education world. And he said the following thing. As a biologist, I'm fascinated by the anatomical and physiological complexity of organisms in general, and the human brain in particular, as I learn more and more about Alzheimer's disease. Viewing your brain helps me to remember what is going on in my wife's brain, to cause her to react in particular ways as I try to respond in meaningful ways and helpful ways to her. So I think that's kind of a general statement, which I think is coming from someone who actually provides the care. It's meaningful. So there's a few things that I believe that the piece could be used beyond the, encouraging people to pursue their aspirations between neuroscience and the arts in general, the general public, but also people with dementia, with the healing power of engagement in artwork, and also family care partners and professionals who can really benefit from the calming effects of engaging in artwork. And really, family members desperately need those breaks and need the assistance and support from others to be able to continue and be centered and to replenish their energies to care for their loved ones. So engaging in artwork could be a wonderful way for them to do that. But the main things are that by looking at the brain hemisphere, and there's many models out there, you can find them in the internet about the different parts of the brain. There's the virtual brain tour of the Alzheimer's Association. We can share links later that is very useful. There's a brain animation that was created by David Schenk, which we also have a link to, that is a very simplified and basic illustration of the different stages of Alzheimer's disease corresponding to the different parts of the brain. It's very simple illustration, but it does give a sense of the different functions of the brain in these individuals. So again, it helps us as an educational tool when we talk about the different parts of the brain. It can help and their functions to identify the deficits in the brain along the disease trajectory. As importantly is to identify the strength, the remaining abilities of the person, whether it's the long-term memory, whether it's music abilities, whether it's artistic abilities, whether it's procedural memory, and other functions that remain, especially the amygdala, which I mentioned earlier, the ability to feel and experience the full range of emotions that we all feel. And people with dementia are experts in general because they actually know what it means to live with the disease, but they're also experts in really sensing our core emotions. And if we're approaching a person with Alzheimer's disease when we're anxious, they're going to mirror those emotions and they're going to pick up on those emotions and respond accordingly. If we're able to center, and there's centering techniques from the validation method, to remove ourselves from our frustrations, to clear them away and our concerns, and to be centered and present, then we can approach them in a calm way, which they're going to pick up and respond, and more likely to respond in a calm way. And there are studies that actually demonstrate that. So that has value in and of itself. So in terms of the stages of Alzheimer's disease, we know that certain parts of the brain are responsible for early on in the early stages for learning and memory. There's parts of, and then there's issues with thinking, and then it moves to a part of the brain where the thinking and planning, and what we call a term that is often overlooked, because we talk a lot about the memory, and that's critical, but we often don't talk about the executive functions. And what are the executive functions? The executive functions is one definition is the ability to plan, initiate, monitor, and stop a complex task that for us, we take for granted, but for people with dementia could be very difficult. And could be anywhere from the sequencing that could be very difficult at some point of the disease in terms of choosing the clothing items in the morning in the right order, okay? Or getting from point A to point B in any space, whether it's indoor or outdoors. There's a lot of issues with visuospatial problems with this population and wayfinding difficulties and becoming lost indoors and outdoors. So, and then it moves to speaking abilities, parts of the brain are in charge of speaking abilities and understanding. And only later on, usually there's in Alzheimer's disease, in old people with Alzheimer's disease, there's only then, in the later stages, there's more impact on the emotional parts of the brain, on the amygdala. So that's why we want to focus on the emotions. So for example, a couple of years ago, I gave a presentation at a support group for family members of people with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. And one woman who cares for her mother said that she's the only person in her family who is able to communicate effectively with her mother and to gain her cooperation from her entire family. And the interesting part of the story was that the daughter is deaf. She can't hear. And the mother can hear well, but she did not learn sign language. And I think that the message of this story is that communicating with people with Alzheimer's disease at a certain point of the disease is more about the emotions that are conveyed in both directions from and to the person with Alzheimer's disease, and less about the words and the behaviors that may not make sense to us in the moment. So this is what we really need to focus on their emotional needs, on their psychological needs. When we are over-occupied with the brain and the amyloids and the plaques and the memory and the activities of daily living, which we should focus on them. But I think that as the late Tom Kitwood taught us, I think that the psychological experience of people with dementia is absolutely critical to focus on. And I think that using the brain as an educational tool can help us encourage family members and professionals to focus on those aspects when they're interacting, working with, and caring for these individuals.
Yeah. A question for you. I was just, as you were talking, thinking about the different parts of the brain. Have you ever thought about carving one as a puzzle piece so you could literally take the pieces out and the kids could see?
Well, I think that while I think that I have a long way to go and to learn. So what I mean by that, I'm carving only 4 years, and I think that there's certain skills that I would love to learn, and that's a very ambitious project, which I would love to do one day. But I think that it's a matter of gaining those skills. And first, of course, it's experimenting and exploring and practicing, which is fun, and it's part of the process. But it's this is something that I would consider doing, but it will take me a long time because I know how long it took me. It took me 62 hours just to do this piece, let alone a dozen other or dozens of other pieces. But it's interesting that you're asking, because there is one part of the brain, and it relates to what we talked earlier, that actually it was Dr. Spencer from Yale University. When I met him, he told me, when I talked about the amygdala, he said there's a part of the brain that is actually representing the pathway of emotions throughout the brain. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the amygdala, it's much more spread out in the brain. And this aligns with what we know about other parts of the brain. There's a tendency to think, oh, emotions are only in one part of the brain, or thinking or whatever is just one part of the brain. As we learn more about the brain, I'm not a neurologist or neuroscientist, but that's what I hear. We're learning that it's all interrelated. It's all intertwined, and we're just learning about the brain. So it's interesting that you're asking, because he said that there is a one part of the brain that represents the pathway of emotions throughout the brain. And he actually has that piece. And I'm going to ask him soon if he can share an image of it, or if I can find an actual model of it that I can carve. And that could be a good start to what you suggested now, which I love the idea. And then I can also use it during presentations and trainings with care partners, because that's really the most important part of the brain that we need to focus. And of course, other parts are very, very important in terms of the deficits, anticipating them and proactively compensating for them, and then focusing on the remaining abilities, such as the long-term memory that remains into later stages of the disease, those cherished memories of distant past, of family, of childhood, of young adulthood. It's really a treasure chamber waiting to be opened. And that's why we really want to learn about the early life history of people with dementia. And I have a document that describes 20 reasons why we want to learn about the early life history of people with dementia, which I can share as well. But in any case, I would love to do that one day. It was a long response, but I thought it would be hopefully useful.
Okay. I have to ask, do you have any other wood carving kind of projects in mind, or things that you would like to do here in the future?
So I already shared the piece, See Me, Not My Dementia. As you mentioned earlier, as an educational tool to focus on the person and less about the deficits. So that's one piece that I find very useful, and I use in every presentation that I give. I want to mention a piece that was done in a different kind of material, and then I want to share a dream that I have into the future about what I want to carve in the future. So I want to share a piece of beautiful rain that it's called My Soul, and it was done by Catherine Dawson, Dowson, in 2005. And I want to show the picture, and then I'm going to share a couple of words about it.
Okay.
So what you see in the picture is actually a laser-etched crystal glass. So she used laser to etch the patterns of her own brain, which was captured in MRI, magnetic resonance imaging scan. And she used that pattern to etch with laser the pattern of her own brain, which I thought was very cool. And it's presented in a fabulous, fabulous book that it's called Brains, and the mind as a matter, so again, that's the piece. And it's just to encourage people to find the type of material that they like to work with. And it doesn't matter if it's clay, it doesn't matter if it's marble, if you want to carve in it, but just to choose the type of material that you think you're going to enjoy working with, and just explore doing artwork in general, and maybe something related to people with dementia that you can share with others later on.
Okay. Great. Well, this has just been a really interesting conversation. Now, you said that you do have one kind of goal, though, in mind, in that dream that you had. So why don't you share that, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up here.
All right. So my dream is to carve a large-scale model of the brain hemisphere that you saw, and place it at the entrance to a science museum or a neurology center or a neuroscience center. So if anyone knows about such a center, whether it's anywhere in the US or abroad, I'll be happy to explore that with you or with people working in those centers. I'm trying to engage the the Museum of Science in Minnesota and other neuroscience centers. In fact, the Regions Hospital is building a new neuroscience center as we speak, which is going to be opening next spring. And I am in touch with some of the people there, with Dr. Michael Rosenblum, and head of neurology, and also the head of the Memory and Aging Center, and exploring ways perhaps to do it there. But hopefully it will work out, and if not, perhaps somewhere else. So yeah, that's my hope, and we'll see if we'll be able to realize it.
Wonderful. Well, Eilon, do you want to tell people how to get in contact with you?
Sure. So my email is my name in one string, which is Eilon Caspi @gmail.com. So it's EILON, N like Nancy. Caspi is CASP as Paul and I, and then at gmail.com. Eilon Caspi @gmail.com. And we can share maybe a link to my website. There's also a link to my other wood carved items that we can share. So yeah, that's how you can contact me, and feel free to ask questions and comment and make suggestions. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay. And your website is dementiabehaviorconsulting.com, is that correct?
Yes. If you Google Dementia Behavior Consulting, it should come up. But that's the URL. And also, I want to mention that I'm just going to pick it up real quick. I have this piece of the professional image with a caption at the top, with the name and the credit to the Cushing Center and to the photographer. Beautifully framed piece, which I'm selling to everyone who is interested. You can find information on my website. It also might be sold on a healthcare products store, which is a learning website, sometimes in the next few months. So I hope we're in communication about it. So if you want to purchase one of these, I'm happy to sell it to you, to ship it to your home, and just let me know.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for spending so much time with us today and sharing your craft and your passion. Really appreciate it very much.
Well, I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share my wood carving work with others. So thank you so much, Lori.
Great. And I want to thank our audience for watching Conscious Caring Resources with our guest today, Eilon Caspi. And we hope you found this information helpful and fun, and that you'll go ahead and share it with your family and friends and colleagues, and maybe you'll be inspired to utilize your craft, your skill, or one of your dreams to do something to raise awareness and and help educate people with dementia. I also want to let you know that if you're interested in being a guest on Conscious Caring Resources, please reach out to me at Lori, Lori, at alzheimerspeaks.com. You can just reach me there. That's the easiest. Or you can go directly to our website, alzheimerspeaks.com, and there's a big contact button up in the header. Have a blessed life, and hope you will check out our next Conscious Caring resource video. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye now.
Thank you, Lori. Bye-bye.